So, welcome to Small Farm Living. My name is Julie, and today we are going to do some fun fall crafts. Now, this is a cone that I picked up at the Dollar Tree, and I thought when I looked at this that this would be really cute made into a candy corn. So, I went down into my daughter's stash of yarn. She crochets like nobody's business, and she's only a teenager. But I picked some orange, a kind of a mild yellow. The only other yellow she had was kind of neon. So, and then kind of a creamy tone. Now, the first thing that I was going to do was just use the yarn in a single layer. And so I started by gluing one on here. And when I looked at it, I was like, oh man, this is going to take forever. This yarn is so thin. So I went down, grabbed one of her crochet needles, and I do know how to single crochet and double crochet pretty good. So I thought, you know what, I'll just do a row of single crochet strands, and that will make the lines thicker. So you can see how much thicker already that is, and it will help the project go much faster. So I just proceeded to do a huge long string of single crochet. And no, I am not left-handed. I just flipped the screen around so that you guys can kind of see the view from my point of view. So now that I've got my whole strand done, I'm going to glue it down. Now on the very bottom row, I do glue the whole entire thing around the whole base of the bottom, and that is so that the yarn doesn't slip off the bottom when you pick it up. Otherwise, as we start moving up and around the candy corn, I don't glue it, but maybe every once so often just to kind of keep the strands in place. So you can see when I get back to where I first started it, I just kind of lift and go up onto the second row. And again, I'm not going to glue for a little while from this point on. I'm just going to make sure that I have my strand straight. And then as soon as I got to as high as I thought that I should get for the yellow on the candy corn, I'm just going to make sure that my rows are all kind of tucked down tight on top of each other. And then I will glue that down into place. And my glue stick, I had to put a new one in there. Now, this is the orange. It wasn't my favorite color of orange, but it is kind of candy corny looking. So I did a whole row of single crochet on that. And then I just butted up to where I stopped with the yellow. And then I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm just going to wrap it around. And then on this row, because we're getting closer to the top, I am going to do a little bit of a tack with some glue just to keep it in place before I continue on with the rest of the rows of the orange. And then this was a little bit longer than I needed it to be because what I was trying to do was start and stop each row in the exact same side so that I could use that for the back, even though it's not super noticeable. So where I cut it off, I just barely touched the glue, the tip of the glue gun onto the yarn and then pinched it together so it didn't fray. And then I glued that down to keep that into place. And then you'll notice I switched to bright white because when I started looking at the cream, it looked too similar to the yellow and it just didn't stand out enough. And candy corns are pretty obvious when it's the yellow, the orange, and the white. So I did bright white and I just wound it all the way around until I got to the top. And again, I did tack this because I was getting even closer to the top and I wanted to make sure my rows were going to stay in place. And let me tell you, hot glue seeps right through yarn. I felt it multiple times on this project. So now as we get to the top, the cone is flat. So what I did is as I was winding my yarn around up into the cone shape, at the very, very edge that I did as I'm winding the single crochet strand, I'm gluing it on top of the bottom one, if that makes sense, so that it stays in place. And as I'm winding it, I'm just making it smaller and smaller as we get to the top. And then as we get to the top, I'm putting one last final layer around and I'm stacking that on top. And then the little hole that is in the center there, I'm just going to put another glob of glue on there. And I'm going to wrap it around until it's almost tight where there's not much of any opening, but I do want to leave just the slightest little bit right there. I'm going to hold that in place until it is dried, and it does take a little bit with yarn for some reason, but we got there eventually. I cut off the excess and I did the same thing. I didn't squeeze any glue out. I just tapped what was on the tip of the glue gun there and pinched it together so the yarn did not fray and come apart. And then I took a barbecue skewer and I stuffed the rest of that strand down into that hollow tip that we created at the top of the cone, just so that it gave it more structure. And once I got it all tucked down in there, I took some more hot glue and I just put a little tiny amount at the tip there, and I pushed it down just enough to get it tucked in and to make a little point at the top of my candy corn. And now instead of having a flat top, we've got a cone. So here is what it looked like when it was all done. I think it turned out really sweet. I would like to find maybe a little bit of a brighter color yellow, just not the neon that my daughter had. But overall, I think it turned out really sweet, and I like how we could just make the point go up with the yarn instead of having a flat top. And we have a cute little piece of candy corn for our fall decor. Now on to craft number 2. These are Jenga blocks I picked up at the thrift store, and we are going to make some tumbling block pumpkins. That one was chewed. I don't know. Probably somebody's cat or dog or kid chewed on it, but we put that one aside. And the first row is going to be, or in the center is going to be 3, and then there's going to be 2, and then there's going to be 1. And this is going to make up the small pumpkin. You see how that all fits together? So what we're going to do is we are just going to put hot glue onto the side, and then we're going to stick the 2 sides together. And I didn't use any glue other than hot glue for this project, and it's stuck together really, really well. And then we'll put our third piece on for our center row. And then we're going to do the same thing for the second row. Put those 2 pieces together, and then once those 2 are glued together, we're going to then lay it flat, and then we're going to just swab some hot glue across those, and then we're going to glue those to the face of the middle row, and we're going to try and center those so that the lines are centered with the blocks next to it. And then the last one, all we have to do is put a little bit of glue on the face of it and squish it together like that. And then we will do the same thing for the other side. So question for you, and put it down in the comments for me if you would, please. I was just thinking in some of my upcoming fall videos, I might, if I'm making a project on something, while you're watching me create it, do a little brief history or a little story about what it is and how it came to be part of fall and the fall decorations. So if you think that would be fun, let me know. Otherwise, I'll just keep narrating like I always have. So now we have our whole first pumpkin put together. And then I went down to my stash, and I have just these regular little tumbling blocks from the Dollar Tree. They're the small ones. They're not the Jenga pieces. And 2 of these together made a nice looking stem. So I'm just going to glue 2 of the flat sides together on this. And then I'll put a little bit of hot glue onto the bottom of it. And I'll glue that right smack in the center of my middle row of my pumpkin. And there we have our first unfinished pumpkin. And now the second one I wanted to make a little bit bigger. So all I did, instead of 3 rows in the center, we went 4. And in the middle row, instead of 2, we ended up with 3, and then 2, and then 1. And so it made just a slightly larger pumpkin. And I'm going to glue this one together. And then for the stem, because this pumpkin is a little bit bigger, I was going to do two of the blocks one direction and one the other, but they weren't quite, the one on the side wasn't big enough. So I just did 3 in a row together like this, and then glued those all together, and then glued them onto the top of the pumpkin right smack in the center, just like I did the other one. And now this orange, I picked it up at the Hobby Lobby, I think, and it just reminds me of those fake foam pumpkins at the Dollar Tree, the color of it. So I'm going to add a little bit of red to it and see if I can come up with a good color of orange that I like for a pumpkin. So I put some of that bright orange on, and then red is such a dominant color that I just put a little bit on it first. And sometimes when you put a little bit of red, it just overpowers, but this wasn't even nearly enough. So I ended up squeezing quite a bit more on there and mixing it in. And then when I put that on, I had too much, so I went back to a little bit more of the light orange. I'm not a mixologist, but I eventually got there. So all I did was painted the top of the Jenga blocks, and these are raw cut edges, so they really suck the paint up quite a bit. And then once I got the tops painted, then I just moved on down to the sides. And you will notice as I'm painting this that you can see, because the Jenga is kind of stamped in there, so it's an impression. It's not like something that you can paint over and it completely disappears. So I did go around and I did 2 coats, and I tried to go heavier over the Jenga, but you could still see it a little bit, but no big deal. I went down into my stash of dried flowers, and these are actually off artificial roses, but I kind of like the way there was little trendles at the top of these. So I'm just going to deconstruct these and then glue them back together and just make my own little version of little leaves and some trendle stems for a pumpkin. So I just kind of glued 3 together. And then I took some more of my binding wire. And if you're interested in any of the items that I'm using, I have a link to my Amazon shop down below, and this is in there as well. And any purchases you make help my shop with a small little commission, and it's greatly appreciated. So on this one, I'm just going to bend it in half and then kind of wrap it around the stem, pull it up behind the leaves, and then I'm going to tack it with a little bit of hot glue. And then once I had that glued on, I just wrapped it around my barbecue skewer again with my binding wire to make little trendles. And I apologize for my hands, as I do all the time, because I was out stocking my farm stand this morning and picking tomatoes, and my hands have gotten very stained. But I love to craft and I love to farm, so you get the best of me and the stained hands too. So I just worked with the barbecue skewer on one, and then I took the end of a paintbrush on the other one, so that both of my little trendles were kind of different shapes, because in nature they're never the same. So just to give it a little bit of variation on there. And I cut that off, and then I'm going to make 2 for the large pumpkin and then 1 for the small pumpkin, and I will work on that. Now that I have those all done, we will set those aside, because the next thing I'm going to do before I put those on is paint the stem. Now I'm going to take this brown paint. We got this, I believe, at Hobby Lobby, and I'm going to paint all of the stems with this brown. And I'm not going to leave them just solid brown, but as I was painting, I noticed that I must have been a little heavy-handed with the orange paint, because where it was in the crease between the stem and the pumpkin, it was not dry. And so I was streaking some of that up into the stem, which didn't bother me at all, because I was actually going to be doing a little bit of a technique on the stem anyway, so it just gave it a little bit more character. So I just painted all sides of this, and the top as well. The top again is raw wood, so it really sucked in the paint. I had to put a little extra on there. But once I got all of the sides painted, I went ahead and did the small pumpkin too. And then I took some of my green paint, and this is an old, really stiff, worn out brush, and I love to use it for dry brush effects. So I just tapped a little bit of the green paint in the lid, dabbed the excess off on my paper towel, and then I just streaked in an upward motion onto the stem of the pumpkin. Because if you've ever grown pumpkins or looked at a stem, they're not just one solid color. They usually have veining and a few different color variations in it. So can you see what that looks like there? Just makes it look a little bit more natural, even though we are just making tumbling block pumpkins. So once I had both of those done, I just went ahead and put a little bit of hot glue on the stem portion of my big pumpkin, and I glued him kind of down near the base. And again, pumpkins in nature, the stems really aren't at the base. They're kind of just hanging off of the stem here and there. So that's why I stuck this one kind of up and off to the side. Excuse me. And I fiddled with it a little bit. And then I glued the small one on pretty much the same way, but I put him more down at the bottom just because it kind of helps blend the stem and the base of the pumpkin together. So now that I have this done, you could leave them just like this and they're totally cute, but you know me, I grow flowers, I dry flowers, and I have straw flowers. So we're going to add these on here just to make them a little extra cute. So I just put some hot glue onto the base of each one of the flowers, and then secured the larger one onto the big pumpkin and the smaller one onto the little pumpkin. And then this is what they looked like. I just think they turned out so sweet. One thing that I was thinking about doing, but I didn't do it yet, I may still try to do it, is put a little bit of antiquing wax in the little creases between each one of the blocks just to give it a little more veining effect, I guess you would say, kind of like normal pumpkins do. But what do you think of these? I think they are really fun. I've seen an Apple version, but the blocks are a little bit different. But you can see how you can still kind of see the Jenga. But you know what? That's half the fun. That's what they're made out of, right? So these will be a fun little addition to the fall decor. So now we're going to go on to our last craft of the day. Now you can either use a toilet paper roll or a paper towel roll. Doesn't really matter. Either one is just fine, just as long as they're the kind that you can cut through and are bendable. And once you do kind of cut through them, you do have to tidy up the bottom because it's never usually even. And you just cut little slits just up a little bit on each side. So with this one, you just bend them over and you tuck them kind of in a little bit tighter so your opening of your toilet paper roll or your paper towel roll is a little bit wider. And you do that on both sides. And then you end up with something that looks kind of like this, and it does look a little wonky at first. Then I just took some of this pretty kind of fuzzy orange yarn that my daughter again had in her stash, and you just put a little bit of hot glue inside and then tack it down on the inside. And again, be careful because hot glue seeps right through yarn. And then all you're going to do is just wrap and wrap and wrap. So you'll just wrap it around, tuck it through, and it's pretty easy to do when you're making this version where the center of it is a little bit bigger. And you can see we're left with kind of a donut, or it could even be a napkin ring holder. And so what I'm doing is, this probably looks really kind of complicated, but I am just finger crocheting because I didn't have my daughter's crochet hook up here, but I'm just doing a big loop. I kind of did a little slip knot at the bottom, and then you make a loop and then you slip the yarn through it in a loop fashion and pull it through, and you just slip it and do it just like that. And it just makes a little kind of fat, messy crochet, single crochet row. And then I pulled the end taut, and then I just cut off the end and slipped it back through to make another knot on the end. And now I have a little short piece of crochet that I'm going to glue in here. And I just put a little bit of hot glue in there and I dabbed it on a couple of sides and then glued it down into place. And then I pulled it down through to the bottom and then proceeded to put a little bit more hot glue on there just to make sure it all sides had some of it glued into place. And then I just tucked the rest back up into the bottom to fill the hole. And that's what this one looks like at this point. We will finish it off here in just a moment, but I'm going to show you how to make the second version. You're just going to do the exact same thing, cutting slits on both sides, but you're going to fold it over, and instead of tucking it flat in so that your opening, as you can see, is a little bit more narrow, but you're going to start the same way. You're going to glue it in there. And then what I like to do with the more narrow opening like this is put a little piece of painter's tape or masking tape on the end of the yarn. That way it's much easier to feed through the center of the toilet paper roll. And then again, just wrap and wrap and wrap. And then when you get to the end, I cut off the masking tape or the painter's tape. And then I just put a little tiny dab of hot glue on there, pulled it taut, and then tucked it through into the center and glued it in. And then just fluff it around. And if you see any more gaps like this one here, I just took a scrap piece of yarn and I cut it down to the size that I would need and did just like we did when we start and finished it. I just glued it at the top, and then I wrapped it around, and then I glued it at the bottom. So it covered up any gaps that were showing. And then you can see with this one, as we get this tucked in here, I'm going to use the tape for my fingers because I don't have my silicone fingers up here. But you see how much smaller the opening is on this one? So it makes it much easier when you're finishing it, but it's really hard when you're feeding the yarn through. So I went and got 2 pieces of sticks out of my stash, and then I'm taking some more binding wire. I just cut a couple pieces, folded them in half, and then I'm going to glue those each to the bottom of my stick, the portion that's going to get stuck down into the center of the pumpkin. So I'll put a little bit of hot glue on there and then make sure that my binding wire is facing up. Did that to both pieces. And then I put some hot glue, pretty good amount, in the center of the pumpkin. Took my stick with my bind wire sticking straight up and then tucked it down in there until the glue was secured. And I did the same thing with the one that we put the center in the pumpkin. And I tucked that down in there. And then if you don't like the rough look of the sticks when you cut them, you can use maybe like a little bit of antiquing wax and just touch them up. Didn't bother me, but I took my barbecue skewer again and made my little trundle curlies. Now you could curl these before you glued them on or after, whatever floats your boat. And there we have two adorable little pumpkins. Aren't they cute? So here they are. Now, these are so fun to make, and they would be so cute in a whole bunch of different shades of creams and whites and oranges and even the blues. I'm really loving the blues for fall this year, and I'll have some of that coming up. But let's do a final wrap up of all the projects that we did today. Again, we have our cone from the Dollar Tree that we just did a single crochet and turned into a candy corn. We have our tumbling block pumpkins that I just think turned out so sweet. It would be fun to experiment making many different sizes of these or maybe doing stacking ones. And then our little yarn pumpkins that we just finished. I just think they're so sweet. These would be really cute on a tier tray. So let me know if you have a favorite or if you've actually even tried these before. And thanks for hanging out with me today. I'll see you next time.